Welcome to the Healthy Perspective Podcast with your host, chiropractor, entrepreneur, mentor, and author, Dr. Chris Bowman. He'll break down and extract the secret sauce behind his own success and the success of some of the top leaders in every category and from around the world. Get ready for your weekly mental adjustment because shift is going to happen.
What's up, Healthy Perspective crew? This is Dr. Chris, your podcast host, and I just wanted to give you a heads up that we are getting into a sensitive topic of pornography and addiction in this episode. So I don't think it would be wise to have your kids around for this one. Not that we talk about anything crazy or explicit, but I want to make sure that you are able to have the conversation about porn and addiction on your terms rather than them hearing about it and you having to discuss it when you might not be prepared. That being said, this episode has a wealth of information, and I think it brings up the topic of porn and addiction in a way that is not taboo and in a way that is easy to relate to either your kids or maybe relate to your life. If these things, porn and addiction, are struggles in your life, and you want prayer or you want somebody to talk about with it, I'd be happy to go through that with you, just to be open and have the space for healing for you. Just wanted to give you that heads up. Enjoy the episode and talk to you soon. What's up, everyone? Thank you so much for joining us on another episode of the Healthy Perspective Podcast. Today is going to be an impactful one, I promise you. We have Mr. Joshua Shea, who is a pornography addiction expert, certified betrayal trauma coach, and the author of 3 books about pornography addiction, including He's a Porn Addict, Now What? An Expert and Former Addict, Answer Your Questions. Since 2008, Joshua has given more interviews about pornography addiction betrayal than anybody in the world. You know, when I first saw Josh's profile, it was really important to me that we get him on the show because I feel like this is something that goes beyond what most health professionals actually talk about. You know, we were talking before the show, I talk about people's backs, I talk about nutrition, I talk about, mental health as far as, making sure you don't have a stressful work life or, those sort of things. But addictions like these largely go untalked about. And so I feel like bringing it to light would help not only my patients open up that conversation if that's somebody that's struggling, but I feel like, and you can either deny me or agree, but I feel like the hardest thing about being an addict, especially something like porn or alcohol, is that you feel lonely, is that there's no one else out there that can help you. And therefore you continue to entrench yourself deeper and deeper and deeper. So Josh, I'd love just to kind of hear your story, where you started to where you are now, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what we're going to do in the future.
Yeah, well, the nutshell version, Chris, and thank you for letting me come on the show and speak to your audience, is that I was a textbook porn addict raised in the 80s. This is before internet, magazines, videotapes. And in the long story short is that I used pornography to deal with repressed trauma from abuse as a child, both sexual and mental/emotional. I became a porn addict at 12 years old. I became an alcoholic at 14 years old.
Wow.
And then for the next 22 years of my life, I tried my damnedest to overachieve so I didn't have to deal with who I really was. And behind closed doors, I was a pornography addict. Nobody knew about that. A lot more people knew about the alcohol because that's harder to hide. Much like you said, video game addiction, gambling addiction, pornography addiction, these kinds of addictions are known as process addictions. They're much easier to hide. They're also really much newer into the lexicon. And you think about things like opiate addiction and how much time is devoted towards, talking about that in society. It was the number one thing we were talking about prior to the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And then you think to yourself, well, I just like to look at porn, or I just like to play video games. And I think that you're absolutely right. There's so many people who feel alone at that. And when I went into recovery, I made the decision after looking and seeing so few resources for regular people. There are plenty of stuff for scholars, plenty of stuff for doctors, but the regular guy, the regular gal who is dealing with a pornography compulsion or pornography addiction, there wasn't much out there. And since I have a history as a journalist, I decided that I would start creating resources. I thought it would be one book, my autobiography, which came out in 2018. But then I got so much feedback from partners who were suffering because of their partner's addictions. That was the betrayal trauma part. And as I schooled myself, as I started to go through recovery and whatnot, I decided that I wanted to ultimately be a coach to help both the person who is the addict and their partner who is dealing with the betrayal of finding out, because the partner often thinks, I'm not enough. Why don't they love me? Am I not good in bed? Am I not good looking enough? And I go right to my story of, I was a porn addict at 12. I was an alcoholic at 14. I met my wife at 26. How could she have anything to do with any of this? And it's important that people understand what addiction is. And now I go out there and I coach about half the time. And then I go out and I educate the other half of the time about pornography addiction. And I do let people know right up front, I don't view myself as anti-pornography, because that would be akin to banging my head against a wall. What I am is pro healthy sexuality. And the reality is, now that we have high speed internet coming into a dozen devices in our house, and that includes every kind of sexual dalliance you could ever imagine that's been committed to film, we don't know how to use this stuff. And that's what our current society needs to do, is to learn how to use pornography, to learn what could be good or bad, to learn the red flags. And yes, it's not going anywhere, but it needs to be part of our discussion as people, how this kind of sexuality fits into our culture.
What type of damage were you seeing either in your own marriage or the other relationships that you've chatted with, of, the damage of that addiction?
Well, for those people who I dated or was with or had to hide from, it was just complete deceit. And not just deceit, but when you get into the ongoing stages of addiction, or in the last probably 2 years or so, when I was in the critical phases, your deceit becomes hardcore manipulation. You have one master, and that is your addiction. It came before my wife. It came before my kids. It came before my job, and just really, like I said, especially the last year or two, really wreaked a ton of havoc. I ended up losing a job from a company that I was a quarter owner from, because
Wow.
the other three owners just couldn't deal with me anymore. Uh, you know, Leading up to it, during the addiction, I burned bridges with my family and with a lot of my friends.
Mm.
It was all about trying to keep up the facade that I was okay, but in reality, my body 24/7 was screaming for porn and screaming for alcohol. And if that meant that I had to stab you in the back, I would. And if that meant I had to stab you in the front, I would do it with a smile.
Wow. Did you, in all your, research and journalism and whatnot, did you get into like the differences between alcohol addiction, what maybe even sugar addiction, porn addiction, all these things, like what's happening in the brain?
Well, and that's exactly it. Is I always try to let people know that, uh, drug addiction, cocaine addiction doesn't take place in the nose. Food addiction doesn't take place in the stomach,
Mm.
and sex and porn addiction doesn't take place between the legs. It all takes place up here in the brain. And 95% of addiction is exactly the same in the brain. When it lives in the brain, that's where it's pretty much all the same. That's where it's your chemicals are screaming at you to do things, and you truly believe that if you don't, feed the beast, if you don't calm that storm in your mind, the only stop is death. There's no question. It's like, why do you breathe? Because you have to. Why did I drink and look at porn? Because I had to. My
Mm.
mind told me that I absolutely had to. And much like you would, If you got to the point where you were so thirsty you thought you'd die, you would steal water. You would lie to get water. You would do what you had to do. And that sometimes is what happens with addicts. That's why you hear about so many of us getting in trouble with the police. That's why you hear about so many of us wrecking our families, is because that addiction becomes more important than anything else and any possible consequences that could come from anything else.
Wow. Now, most people that you get the opportunity to work with, is it them, the addict, coming to you for help, or a like a partner or a spouse or something like that coming to you saying, please help them, or 50-50?
Yeah, it's a mix. My clients are divided in half pretty much by porn addiction or betrayal trauma. And 80% of the porn addicts are men, 80% of the betrayal trauma sufferers are women. A lot of times I do get the people with betrayal trauma who ask me if I'll talk to their partner who is an addict.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the time that partner isn't ready to talk. And I have to let them know, if he or she doesn't want to talk to me, if they don't think they have a problem, I don't have any magic tricks that I can use. I'm not, I can't just wave a wand or flash my fingers at them and they're under my control. If you could do that, you would have figured out how to do that a long time ago. You have
Right.
to want to succeed. When
Right.
I was in rehab, I saw people who had been there a dozen times
Wow.
and were still of the mindset that they were not going to get better because
Wow.
they didn't have a problem, or they weren't going to get better because they were beyond hope. And I know that both of those cases are incorrect because I felt that way a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
time. And I have seen people who have been to rehab 14, 15 times who that final time just say, enough of this. I have to fix my life. I've been
Mm-hmm.
wasting my time for 10 years or 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And they finally decide to get it together. And I always tell people, uh, I was a professional who owned two businesses. I was a city councilor, so I was a local politician. I was very well known, wife and kids, nice house, two cars, plenty of pets. If I can be your stereotypical porn addict, anybody can, which means there is no stereotypical porn
Mm-hmm.
addict. And that's what's important. We don't, if I say who is a drunk, it's really hard to describe it to me
Mm-hmm.
because anybody could be an alcoholic.
Right.
Who is who is addicted to cigarettes? That could be anybody. And the reality is, this isn't about a 19-year-old guy who has never kissed a girl living in his mom's basement. This isn't about the 75-year-old deviant flashing people at the park in a trench coat. Anybody can be a pornography addict. Man, woman, doesn't matter the color, doesn't matter the religion, doesn't matter the socioeconomic background, the age. I have met just about every type of person who could be a porn addict. So the idea of, well, I'm not that kind of person, that doesn't hold water anymore.
Right. Now, you mentioned, like, this person has to want change. Like, there comes a moment where it's like you decide, like, I am that person no longer. And I'm sure you've seen plenty of, I don't know what you call them, but like light bulb moments, or
That aha moment. Yeah.
so I'm sure it's different for everybody, but I'm also sure, I'm an entrepreneur. I talk with a ton of entrepreneurs, throughout my practice days and whatnot, and people on podcasts, and I feel like that aha moment is can be applicable for not only addiction, but accelerating your business, changing your marriage, changing your, like, so is it just like asking the right questions, or how do you guide somebody to that aha moment?
The aha moments are really just about connection, and that's one of the things that addicts do, is they live their lives very compartmentalized. I
Mm-hmm.
had my professional life with this business, my professional life with this business. I had my political life. I had my life for my kids, my life for my wife, my life for my parents. I compartmentalized everything, and that's what a lot of addicts do, and because that makes life more manageable. When the reality is, your life is like a bunch of puzzle pieces, but you're not going to get the full picture until you put those pieces together.
Right.
And that's what's so important, is because all the pieces are there. When you put them together, you see a full picture. You may not understand why puzzle piece A fits to puzzle piece C. But once you find puzzle piece B and you put them in the middle, puzzle piece B fitting A and C together, that's the aha moment. That's the, oh my goodness, this applies to me. I was at alcohol rehab for 8 days before I had my aha moment. I went there just thinking, I'm going to fake it. I'll be there for 28 days. I'll get my little certificate and that'll make everybody happy and I can go back to my life. On the eighth day, and I've played along for a week. On the 8th day, we did an exercise where we figured out how much we had driven drunk in our life. And I am still embarrassed and still shamed to say that I figured out I had driven drunk over 1,600 times in my life because I'd started driving. I was drinking and I was an alcoholic before I got my license. And I didn't get into recovery until just after my 38th birthday. So that's 23 years. And if you drive drunk once a week or, a little over once a week, it's not hard to get to that kind of number. And when I saw that number, there was no way that I could tell myself that there wasn't a problem anymore. And I realized how many times I'd driven in the car drunk with my wife, with my kids, with my parents, how many times that I had just been so drunk, even alone, that it's amazing I was able to find my car, much less negotiate it. So that was my aha moment. And there were plenty of aha moments along the way in recovery. And I think once people hit their first one, they want more because it's like all of a sudden you had a light shined on something that you just had never seen it shined on before. And then you want those moments and you want to go after those moments and you want to learn more.
Right. I love that, and I don't know if you saw when you were checking me out, but I have a book called Perspective, Rewire Your Brain for Success and Abundance. And that's exactly what I was hoping that you would say is like, you almost, when you're in the midst of addiction, whether whatever it may be, you see yourself as like, almost like I deserve this, like I need this to keep going. And the second you're able to get that perspective of, oh my gosh, that life, whatever I was doing was so selfish. Like it almost is like, oh, like I see that differently now. Like instead of I need this, other people need me more than, than what I need. And I think that's so cool because talking to people with addiction or, those sort of things, if we're able to, in a sense, minimize, because obviously overcoming addiction is a very big deal. Like you can have an aha moment. I'm sure people have had aha moments and still, go back into it. But if I can tell somebody like, hey, like all it takes is a perspective shift. Once you have it, you got it. Just like once you ride a bike, you never forget. Like you just have this feeling ingrained in you now. I feel like that makes such a big issue so much smaller. It's like, hey, let's look at this differently,
And simply to allow yourself to be the kind of person who is open to a perspective shift, who is open to a mindset shift. Boy, that's really needed in our country right now. That's needed in the world right now. And I have had my perspective changed. And I have had things that I have thought very conservatively about, I now think liberally. And things I thought liberally about, I now think conservatively. And that's totally okay. And it's important, that you own your truth and you're genuine to yourself. And I can tell you that the best part of my days now is that I go through it not worried somebody's going to find out who the real me is. Not worried that I'm going to be found out. Not going through the day with my imposter syndrome, thinking, oh my God, I'm just some dirty alcoholic pervert. When is the rest of the world going to figure this out? Not having that weight behind me, not dragging that anchor everywhere I go. Oh my gosh, that's so freeing and that's so wonderful.
That's huge, and for a country that stands on like freedom, like, you know what I mean? Like this should be what everybody pursues, because you can't live in freedom in other areas of your life if you're living in bondage at home or behind in the closet, or like you're either free or you're not, So what I'd love to do at this point is kind of I'd love to hear maybe what it would be like. Like, let's say somebody like, man, this is resonating with me. I've gone this direction, that direction, that direction. No one's been able to help. I feel like Josh might be someone that he's easy to talk to. He gets me. What is it like if somebody calls you up and said, hey, Josh, I need help. I'm an addict. What does the process look like?
Well, the first thing we do is we have a 30 to 45-minute consultation that's absolutely free. I make sure that I can help you, what you're dealing with is in the scope, and I make sure that our personalities click. Because if our
Yeah.
personalities don't click, there's no healing that I can give you, and that sometimes happens. Like I said, I have actually talked with people where it's like, you're not describing addiction to me.
Mm.
You might be describing a bad habit, but you're not describing addiction. And to lay things out like that. And then it's a matter of what direction you want to go. And I can tell you that with the bulk of my coaching, no matter whether it's the pornography addiction or dealing with the partners who are coping with betrayal and the fallout of finding their partner is an addict, it is only 25% really dealing with triggers.
Mm.
It's only 25% of day-to-day stuff. The real work is in the 75% that is the unresolved trauma, because that's often exactly the problem for somebody with porn addiction. It's exactly the problem with somebody with betrayal trauma, because betrayal trauma, I've yet to meet the person who is betrayed for the first time by their partner looking at porn, or infidelity, because I also will deal with traditional intercourse addiction. That's not the first time somebody's been traumatized. Betrayal trauma is often my latest round of trauma from the last person I thought would do it to me. And so it's a very similar technique where let's just go back and figure out, where did you create some faulty thinking patterns? Let's have you work out why they're faulty. Let's figure out what would be better, and then let's keep building upon that. And while we do that, when you're feeling triggered during the day or when you're feeling triggered in a moment, we develop tools and techniques for dealing with that as well. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach, but that trauma part is the big part. That's the underlying part. That's what the addicts all have in common. That's what I ultimately needed to get through to get to the other side. You tell people, well, if you don't want to drink, just don't pick up a beer. Yeah, I've been in rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous where I've seen people who have not picked up a beer in 20 years and are still completely alcoholics in their mindset.
Wow.
You need to change the mindset
Yeah.
if you're going to fix yourself, because addiction is ultimately just a symptom of a bigger problem.
Right.
It's like if you had a nasty illness and you're only treating the sniffles. Okay, that's great. Maybe the sniffles will get better, but there's something much deeper going on. And with trauma, that is often addiction, or with addiction, I'm sorry, that's often trauma. And that's what needs to be dealt with overall.
Right. Yeah, and that's so good. As a chiropractor, that's what kind of we pride ourselves on, is going to the root cause, of the issue. And I can see why so many people that go to, Alcoholics Anonymous or, accountability partners for, this and that addiction or whatever. It's like you're treating the addiction like it's the problem, when you're right. It's a symptom of something deeper. And so I love that. And I feel like people would rather have that than being treated like something's wrong with them. I'm assuming that's how other things make you feel, like you have this illness that needs to be cured, rather than you have a perspective that if it's shifted, well, now you allow you to bring greater value and impact to the world.
And I tell you, it's I don't want to say funny, but it gives me a tickle every time that I will talk to somebody for the first or maybe the second time, man or women, and they will start talking about their porn use. And when they realize that I'm not going to judge them, I don't care what they looked at. I saw what they saw, and odds are I saw worse. And I know, while it's been a few years, I know all those websites that they went to, and I'm not going to stand in judgment of them.
Right.
And that you can almost see a physical shift in
Yeah.
somebody. Yes, exactly. It's exhaling. It's
Yeah.
just a slumping of the shoulders when they're like,
Yeah.
oh my God, this guy was who I was,
Right.
and this guy isn't that way anymore.
Right.
And it's just this moment of relief where it's like, I don't care if you saw people doing crazy stuff with food to each other while leprechauns danced around and threw
Right.
fish sticks at them while mariachi music played, because you can find whatever you want
Mhm.
out there. And I think one of the reasons we won't talk about pornography as a society is because we all have those little things that go beyond, one partner. We have those little things in the back of our mind, little kinks that are, things we don't want to talk about, but things that, maybe scratch an itch we have. And
Mhm.
to talk about pornography means to talk about scratching those itches.
Mm.
And most people are just still so shamed or so embarrassed that they
Mm.
look at porn, despite the fact that when it comes to people under 50 years old, 80% of men look at porn at least once a month. 60% of women look at porn at least once a month if they're under 50 years old.
Well,
So if you're under 50 and you're actually truthfully not looking at porn, you're in the minority.
mm.
4 out of 5 guys are looking at porn. 3 out of 5 ladies are looking at porn under 50 years old.
Well,
If this is happening in these numbers, we need to talk about this
right.
because there are going to be repercussions later
Yeah.
on. We're
Yeah.
already seeing it studying some of the youngest among us. Men 18 to 30, almost 1/3 say that they either look at too much porn, have an issue with pornography, or have full-blown porn addiction. Now, granted, that's self-diagnosed,
Right.
but when almost 1 out of 3 men under 30 feel like they have an issue with porn, you see how much the internet is
Right.
involved, because that more than doubles the numbers from beforehand.
Right.
We need to learn how to use pornography the way we learn to use alcohol, the way we learn to use cigarettes. And I'm not saying any of this stuff is safe, because it's not, but it's out there and we need to know how to use it. When parents freak out about pornography and like, oh, we put filters on our phone, it's okay. It's like, well, it's not. This world is now not a matter of if you're going to see pornography, it's a matter of when,
Mhm.
especially for children.
Yeah.
And you need to recognize that your kids are going to see porn, but the don't look at porn speech is not the birds and the bees speech. It's the don't use drugs speech.
Mm.
It's the you drink alcohol in my house until you're 21. You cannot smoke cigarettes in my house until you're 18. You have to follow the law. Well, the law currently says you cannot own that material unless you're 18. So follow the law in my house. That's what we need to do as parents and as a society, is to enforce some rules, not be afraid that, oh my goodness, somebody's going to talk about a body part, or somebody's going to talk about sex or something like this. We need to be grown-ups. We need to be beyond this.
Yeah.
And that's the only way, to me, we're going to take care of some of these, future generations, is to completely change how we deal with them and try to clean up the mess one by one for people like me and people a little bit younger who just happened to be there when the internet exploded and really
Right.
didn't know what we were getting.
Right. Right. Yeah. I know my first exposure was innocent. I was looking at Pikachu, looking for Pokemon, and something popped up, and it's like,
Yeah.
I did, I
Well,
wasn't asking for this, and
I'm still so naive. I went and I bought a new truck recently, and I was looking to see what the what Hummers cost in my area, because I've
Mhm.
always loved that as a truck. The price of a Hummer in Maine is not what you want to Google, because the price of a Hummer in Maine will provide you with plenty of great oral sex pictures.
Jeez
But
Louise.
again, that's it. You can stumble onto it so easily
Right.
that you have to expect that your child is going to. If you lock down their phone, congratulations. You lock down one of 4.8 billion phones in
Mm-hmm.
the world.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when their friend shows them porn?
Right.
What happens when their coworker shows them porn?
Right.
We need to be more educated in our society,
Yeah.
and we need to spread information, because education and information is really how you evolve as a people. It's not through war or screaming or brute power. It's through education. And I just believe that if we can become an educated society with porn addiction, that's one less thing for us to deal with. And maybe there are some kids out there who won't go through what I did.
Yeah.
And if I can do that, I spent the first 40 years of my life as a taker. If I can spend the next 40 years as a giver, trying to help people, maybe I'll even it out.
I love that. Well, thanks, Josh, for joining me. I think this is a conversation that people listen to, and they'll be able to be like, hey, I mean, this is a real conversation that I shouldn't be afraid to have. You know, as a parent myself, I have a little girl that's 5, and I'm terrified of that world as she gets older, you know, and like using even computers at school and, you know, all that stuff as well. But it's helpful to know that, you know, education isn't just talking about it isn't bad. It's like exposing it is helpful, because then you can have relationship with it rather than.
And that's the thing. You and I have sat here talking for about 20-25 minutes, and we have not discussed the content of pornography once. This doesn't have to be a discussion about sex. This doesn't have to be a discussion about the depiction of sex. Right. It can be a discussion about just the idea of pornography in general. It doesn't have to become X-rated. Right. And I hope that, you know, you and I displayed that for people, that they can do this with others and not have it go down salacious roads.
Right. Yep. Yeah, I hope so too. Well, if people want to talk to you, well, where do they go?
My website, it is the letter P. It is paddictrecovery.com. P is in porn, or P is in post-betrayal trauma, paddictrecovery.com. My coaching is there. My books are there. I have 1,000,001 resources if you're looking for a different way to get better, if you have more questions, and you can get in touch with me through there as well. And then on all of the socials, P Addict Recovery as well, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, all that fun stuff.
All the things. I don't know how you keep up with all that. Well, Josh,
you hire an assistant and they do it for you.
There you go. There it is. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I think it's going to be an impactful episode. I'm excited for everyone to listen to it and really just get a subject out there that, like you said, you know, is a growing problem, it's not going away. It's, you know, it's here to stay and probably getting worse. And so if we can get ahead of it becoming a problem, I think that's a much more holistic way to go about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like I said earlier, thank you so much for letting me speak to your listenership. This is one of those things that, you know, we need to give just a little bit of knowledge to everybody to start making some better decisions. So I have the message, but you have the medium. So thank you so much.
Of course. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Healthy Perspective Podcast. To connect with Dr. Bowman, follow him on Instagram @Dr. Chris Bowman. Until next time, make shift happen.